After a one-year hiatus, the Louisiana Book Festival returned in 2011 to downtown Baton Rouge, celebrating the state's readers, writers, and their books. Join us for Louisiana Book Talks as we explore our rich literary culture with highlights from the 2011 Book Festival, featuring journalist and author Cokie Roberts. For 8 years, book lovers of all ages have enjoyed the variety of activities offered at the Louisiana Book Festival. Staged between the Capitol Building and the State Library, the 2011 festival was packed with booths, including everything from children's storytellers to authors signing their latest works. Inside the state capitol, more than a dozen venues featured authors throughout the day, discussing their novels and providing an insight into their creative process. As it has done at prior festivals, the Louisiana Center for the Book presented the Louisiana Writer Award. James Wilcox, the 2011 recipient, was recognized for his extraordinary contributions to the state's literary heritage. Wilcox is a Hammond native and the author of 9 comic novels, most set in the fictional town of Tula Springs, Louisiana. His short stories have appeared in The New Yorker and Avenue. Wilcox currently is the Director of Creative Writing at LSU. In this edition of Louisiana Book Talks, we'll listen in on Emmy-winning journalist and best-selling author Cokie Roberts. Together with her husband Stephen, Mrs. Roberts has written our Haggadah, Uniting Traditions for Interfaith Families. The book serves as a practical guide for families of differing religious faiths, celebrating their very first Passover or starting a new tradition. Among Cokie's previous novels are We Are Our Mother's Daughters, Ladies of Liberty, and Founding Mothers.
Steve is sorry. He is very sorry not to be here, particularly when I told him how good the dinner was last night, and the fact that there's free community coffee at our hotel, where I am staying in the Huey Long Suite. Oh my God! I thought that that perhaps my father's ghost was going to come in and smite me, and I can't wait to tell Mama. She is, by the way, doing well. She's 95. And she was in New Orleans the week before last for Archbishop Hannon's funeral. She came because they, of course, were such good friends. So she's really sorry not to be here. She wanted to come. And in fact, when we were here for the bicentennial of the purchase in the old state capitol, she had a wonderful time. So maybe we can get her back for the bicentennial of statehood next year. But I can't wait to tell her that I was in the Huey Long Suite, completely surrounded by pictures of Huey, Miss Blanche, and all that. Although Russell Long and my father, of course, were very good friends. Anyway, so Steve refuses to take the flu shot, like a lot of ignorant men. And so what happens, and I'm really glad he's not here, because he'd be infecting all of us. But he's sorry. He once actually, normally when we talk about this, we do go back and forth and sort of tell stories about ourselves. We did this once before with a book that we wrote that came out in 2000 called From This Day Forward, which was about our marriage and other marriages in American history. And in that book, I tell a story that is really, a story on me. And when we were out talking about the book, I told this story all the time because so many women related to it. But then we were in Los Angeles, and I got a call from ABC saying, you have to go to Israel now. The Pope is showing up. I mean, the Pope had planned the trip. You'd think ABC would have known, but never mind. And we've got interviews set up with Arafat. That was my draw. That was fun. And the head of the Israeli government, and with the King of Jordan, and you've got to get there. So I leave L.A. and leave Steve on his own to tell these stories. And the one that he really had trouble with was a story about when we had been married just a little while, and we were living in New York, and I couldn't find a job. I had left a really good job in Washington as anchor of a Sunday talk show. And I was 22 by this time. And it had never occurred to us, to even question that I would quit my job and move to New York where he was, even though at that point I was making more money and all of that. It was just the way things were in 1966. And without a job and having trouble finding a job, I kept getting depressed. I was getting depressed. I didn't have a place to go. People kept saying they weren't hiring me, and I couldn't, furnish the apartment because we didn't have any money, and because I didn't have a job, and like that. So I kept setting goals for myself, so that I would get up and get out of bed and go do something. So I'd say to myself something like, you've got to get to the bank by, noon today, that kind of thing. So this particular day, which was right at the end of the year, I said, all right, there's a wedding present that you have to return today. If you don't do it, you've really failed as a human being. And it was from this fancy jeweler on Fifth Avenue. We live in New York. Jorg Jensen. And so I got up, and I couldn't get dressed. I just couldn't manage to get dressed. So I put on my coat over my nightgown, and off to Fifth Avenue I went. And I'm standing at the return counter, returning this gift. And who is there but the person who gave it to us, right? Now, what are the odds? I mean, it's a city of 8 million people, right? I mean, 9/10 of our wedding presents had come from Adler's in New Orleans, and we ran into nobody, except Mama kept returning those presents with wrapped in underwear, and at one point Adler sent her back all of her underwear, nicely pressed, but... So I'm panicked, right? But it's the guy of the couple. So I think he probably doesn't know what they've given us. I mean, that's likely, but still, I want to get out of there. And so I'm moving as fast as I can, saying to the return person, just put it on my account. I have no account. And so I'm almost home free. And then he's been in a phone booth calling his wife to say they don't have X, should I get Y? Oh, and guess who I ran into here? I ran into Cokie Roberts. And she says, was she returning a black and white salad bowl? And then he says, oh, yes. So now I've been caught. And so then, and he thinks it's funny. And then to show me that there are no hard feelings, he says, come on with me. Governor Rockefeller is having his private, I know, it's just unfathomable. His private swearing in today, because the public one isn't until, the next year, and it has to be legally this year, and blah, blah, blah. And like a crazy person, I go with him, right? And so we get into this little townhouse in Manhattan, and it's filled with cameras, and this is 1966 TV cameras. They're huge lights, it's hot as Hades. And everybody keeps saying, of course, can we take your coat? And I kept saying, no, I'm from the South. I'm always cold. It's all right. I'll keep my coat. And then he says, after the ceremony, he says, well, now let's go to lunch. And at that point, I had sense enough to say, no, I think I better go home because, in fact, I'm wearing my nightgown. Well, Steve, really had trouble telling that story, right? But because it's so embarrassing. But he had a good time with it, and he soldiered on. So it's only fair that it's now my turn to do that and tell the story of this book, which is the Passover Haggadah. This is basically the Seder, the meal for Passover for interfaith families. But it's really sort of more than that. It's really kind of how to, I never want to give advice, but it's sort of suggestions for how you can live in an interfaith family in ways that honors both traditions. And we've now been married more than 45 years, and that's not what we fight about. There are other things, but not that. When we were dating 1 million years ago, it did all seem sort of impossible. And even though Steve's family was not religiously Jewish, they were very strongly Jewish. And he was from Bayonne, New Jersey, and he lived very much in a Jewish community. And the idea of marrying out of the tribe was really just shocking and horrible in every way. And so we dated for years. Now, I mean, the truth is he used it as an excuse, not to marry me. I've said, he says that the way he proposed was to say, "Oh, all right, Cokie," and I still do hold it against him. But at any rate, we finally did, sort of figure that we could work this out and we could get married. But then there was the problematic question of the wedding, which is all problematic for so many people on so many levels anyway. So we got married at home in the garden of our home where we still live. I live in the house that I grew up in. It was going to be after sundown on Saturday, so nobody's Sabbath. It was we have my uncle, the Jesuit, Father Boggs, was one of the officiants. He had no choice, and then we looked and looked and looked for a rabbi, and no rabbi would come. We could not find a rabbi who would do it. So my mother-in-law, Steve's mother, said at some point during this, she says, Cokie, I really think that all of this search for a rabbi is distasteful. I'm saying, you think it's distasteful? I'm the one who's, doing it. And she said, and really in our tradition, it just needs to be a learned man. It doesn't have to be somebody who's ordained. And she said, so why don't you find a learned man? Like, say, for instance, Arthur Goldberg. So I did. I asked Justice Goldberg, and he was kind enough to say yes. So that was how it was all going to work out. My mother got my father on a bad day and said, Hale, you've got to sit down and tell me who from the House of Representatives you want to have. And he just didn't want to cope, he didn't want to deal with it. And so he said, all the Democrats. Well, it was after the 1964 landslide, and so there were like more than 300 Democrats in the House. So by the time we had all of them and some friendly Republicans and some senators and the president was coming and all of that, by the time all of that was added up, and of course the entire extended family, and then we got around to people we actually liked, it was 1,500 people, and my mother cooked for the whole thing. Can you imagine? I mean, it's just unbelievable. When my daughter was getting married in the same spot almost 15 years ago, and it was not occurring to me to cook, I said to my mother, why did you do that? And she said, it was cheap. So, and she said, when you have people to your house, you should cook, So, and people were flying shrimp up from here, but that part we weren't doing so well on the two traditions, but Steve's parents didn't care. And so finally the time comes, and we're walking out the door. I'm walking out the door out my front door to walk down my yard and go get married. And there's a chuppah, and it's all beautiful. My mother's been wonderful. And my nephew, my brother's son, Hale Boggs, who turns 50 next week, was 5, and he not quite 5, and he was the ring bearer. And as we're going out to the yard, he turns around to my father and says, "Papa, I lost the ring." So then there's all this frantic stuff of people handing me rings to wear down the aisle, and I'm pull myself up to my full 22 years old of drama and say, this is terrible, we can't do this. It has to be the right ring. The symbolism of this is all wrong. And my father says to me, Cokie, don't you think we have enough symbolism going on here for one night? So we get married, and by the time we come back up the yard, the aisle, the president's doctor had found the ring with the little ear light, so Steve got his wedding ring. But as a result of Arthur Goldberg being the officiant, he and Mrs. Goldberg, who was wonderful, took a great interest in us. And by this time, he was the United States ambassador to the United Nations. And the Goldbergs had a very famous Seder where they invited a lot of people every year. And so we were living in New York, and they invited us to the Seder the following spring after we were married. And it was great. It was the first one I had ever been to, and it was very fancy, but it was great. And I loved the singing. I knew that part because it was all old labor and civil rights songs. And so that convinced me then and there that really we had to have Passover every year from there on out, that it was too central a part of Jewish identity not to have it, even though Steve's family had not. But, it was different for him because he knew he was Jewish. I mean, he lived in this culture of Judaism. For me, it had to be the religion. And of course, as a very serious Catholic, which I am, the comfort level for me was much more in the religion, where I could see so many of the building blocks for Christianity. And so the next year, I was pregnant for our first child. We were not invited back to the Goldbergs. I don't know what I did wrong, but so I said to Steve, would you please ask your parents to have a Seder? And he did, and they were horrified. But because my mother-in-law, first of all, she didn't like doing things that she was unfamiliar with. She and I became dear, dear friends, and she just died last year with me holding her. But she was game. She rose to the occasion. She didn't like the idea that she had to cook something she had never cooked before because she had 14 recipes that she rotated. Monday night, Tuesday night, like that. But she did it. And while we were there, it was just the four of us at Steve's parents' house in New Jersey. While we were there, Steve's twin brother, who had married a Jewish woman and never had a Seder in their lives, calls, and you can hear Steve's father whispering into the phone, I can't talk right now. We're having a Seder. And you hear Mark at the top of his lungs saying, what? Why? And Will whispers back, because Cokie wanted it. Well, that was true. If Cokie wanted it, by the next year we had moved to California, and I realized that if I wanted it, I had to do it. So I gamely went into the nearest temple and bought a Haggadah, which was written by the Jewish Reconstructionist Society. And we hardly knew anybody, but we invited our few friends, and the Jewish members of the party decided they hated the Haggadah, and it was all wrong. It left out this, it included that. Blah, blah, blah. Everybody had a view. So the next year, I sat down at my little Smith Corona typewriter that I had gotten as a high school graduation present, and typed up our Haggadah. And that is basically what this book is, with a few tweaks here and there and a lot of explanations. And I, mimeographed it on that old shiny paper, and over the years it came to have wine stains all over it and all of that. And so at one point, one of our neighbors, who comes regularly to our Seders, did the 25th anniversary edition, excuse me, and so then Xeroxed that one up, and everybody, was horrified. Where are the wine stains? Where are the mistakes? But soon those were a mess too. So that is really what this book is that Haggadah. It became so much part of our family and our lives that when we left California to go to Greece, friends of ours gave us a Seder as a going-away present, even though it was a month before Passover. And then we moved to Greece. And when Passover actually happened, we were still living in an apartment hotel, waiting to get into a house. And our kids were 3 and 5. And I said to Steve, well, we still have to do a little Seder. We can't ignore the fact that it's Passover. And I said, there is a very ancient synagogue down at the base of the Acropolis. And if you go there, I'm sure that either there at the synagogue or there might be a shop around it or something, you'll be able to get some matzah, the unleavened bread that you use in the Passover ceremony. And I said, and if you can't get matzah, you get pita bread, because at least it's unleavened, and it's easy to get pita bread in Greece, So he ignores me. Nothing new there. And, he's way too important to follow out my request. He's a foreign correspondent, after all, wearing epaulets and all of that. And he tells this story himself. But so he realizes that he's about to come home and I'm about to be furious. And so he stops into a pastry shop and shows up with a piece of cheesecake. And I said, cheesecake? What are you doing with cheesecake? You're not supposed to have anything leavened and, it's got a crust and all that. He says, it's Jewish. But then our Greek seders did become much more regular, although the people around the table were of so many different nationalities and religions that it really was wonderful. And it was very sort of expanding in terms of our appreciation of both the Passover ceremony, but also of many religions and cultures, and that became a great part of it. There is a place, however, in the ceremony where the youngest child, or the child that's able to do it, goes to the door and opens the door for Elijah, right? And of course, Elijah doesn't show up. I mean, he's Elijah. And at one point, our son was a little kid, and he went and tried to, open the door for Elijah, and no Elijah. And he comes back, and he says to Steve, he pulls Steve aside and whispers to him, Dad, when you were a little boy and both of your parents were Jewish, did Elijah come to your house? He thought Elijah was boycotting me, the shiksa. And then we had a friend a marriage very similar to ours, a Jewish Catholic marriage. The wife was a foreign service officer, an American foreign service officer, and on his first posting to Brazil, he had met this beautiful Catholic woman, and they married, and they came with their kids to the Seder, and their daughter, Lisa, was about 4, and we sent her out to look for Elijah, and she didn't come back. And she kept not coming back. Now, Athens is very safe, but still, it was worrisome. She was 4. And finally, she wanders back in, and we said, Lisa, what happened? Did you see Elijah? And she said, no, but I saw God. So you never know what's going to happen. That family is still wonderful friends, and Elisa lives in Boston, but her sister lives in Washington, and she and her children come annually to our Seder, which now is back in our house on Bradley Boulevard in Bethesda, and it grew and grew. I'm happy to say people kept having children, and so we had to long ago get out of the dining room. For other holidays, we're spread out all over the house, but for Passover, we have to be in one room because we're all reading the ceremony. And so now what I do is I clear out the glassed-in porch of the furniture and put in, these rented long tables, and it looks for all the world like a VFW hall. But Steve's very sweet, saying, no, it really does look nice, but it doesn't. It is what it is. But it's important to be able to do that because we do want to have all of these people. Steve's parents announced immediately that they would be there every year. Don't ask them. They would just make their pilgrimage from Florida to New Jersey around Passover. And my mother is there religiously. The only years she wasn't there were the years when she was the ambassador to the Vatican, and which was a great experience. There she was in Rome, which we all visited her all the time, and we loved it. Of course, it did involve my mother representing Bill Clinton to the Pope. Now think of it; it was the toughest job in the diplomatic service, And then when she came home, she came home to Bourbon Street, of course, and my mother's house was right smack dab in the middle of the honky-tonk on Bourbon Street. When my kids were small, we'd walk past the strippers and the other neighbors and say, through the woods and over the hills to grandmother's house we go. And then she moved from Bourbon Street to the Vatican, and I teased her that the costumes didn't change. It was still guys in dresses, but But at any rate, and actually at the Vatican, she went to Seder's at the Vatican, at the Israeli ambassador's home. His name was Lopez, by the way, and it was an old Sephardic name. But so she was all set to come back to Washington and come to our Seder's. And part of the reason, again, is because she is a serious Catholic. And one of the things that is so clear in the Passover ceremony is that this is the Last Supper. This is something that Jesus lived, and something that the apostles talked about a great deal. And the rabbis cited in the ceremony are very much part of the world that Jesus lived in. Rabbi Gamaliel was St. Paul's teacher, and Paul talks about that as, I'm a good Jew. I was educated by Gamaliel, and these are the people invoked in the Passover story. So it is very recognizable to a Christian, because the Easter liturgy is really based on the Passover story of going from death to life, from darkness to light, from bondage to freedom. But it's also very important to me that in no way you try to Christianize the Passover itself or the Seder, because this is a Jewish holiday. And Jews all over the world for thousands of years have, sometimes at great personal peril, come together to pray these prayers and sing these songs and remember this story of the Exodus. And so this is not some mishmash Haggadah that is Christian and Jewish. It is the Passover ritual, but it is with explanations for Christians and not footnotes, but sort of boxes that explain things separate from the ritual itself. And there are recipes in there and all kinds of things that make it easier for people to be able to celebrate this wonderful, important, and meaningful feast. So that's why we've done it, and I think you'll enjoy it. We do tell stories as well as the ritual and a few jokes, and so I'm delighted that you've come to listen to me talk about it. So thank you very much.
Louisiana Book Talk is produced in cooperation with the Center for the Book in the State Library and made possible in part by a grant from the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. This program is a production of Louisiana Public Broadcasting.